The champions arrived like gods. One by one, the shuttles docked at the Pinnacle Spire, a massive orbital station that floated above the neutral world of Erith-Ka like a silver crown. Inside, the Great Hall had been built to hold thousands, and today every seat was filled. Representatives from over 60 species had come to watch the gathering of their greatest warriors. The fate of the galaxy would rest on these shoulders. The Drayathi shuttle came first. When the doors opened, Vera Kolshet stepped out, and the hall went quiet before it erupted into noise. She stood 8 feet tall. She had 4 arms, each one thick with muscle and covered in dark red skin that looked like carved stone. Her eyes burned gold, and her jaw was set in the permanent expression of someone who had never lost a fight and never expected to. She walked to the center of the hall, picked up a ceremonial stone pillar that weighed more than a ground transport, and crushed it into dust with her bare hands. The crowd roared. The Drayathi delegation stomped their feet in approval. After her came the Vytheran champion, a being made almost entirely of living crystal. It moved like light itself, bending and shifting, and when it raised one arm, a beam of focused energy cut a perfect circle into the far wall of the hall. Beautiful, deadly. The crowd cheered again. Then came the Gorath champion. He did not need to do anything impressive. He simply walked in, and that was enough. He stood 12 feet tall, and was covered head to toe in natural bone armor that no known weapon in the Concordance could easily break. His footsteps cracked the floor. He nodded once to the Arbiter and took his place, and nobody said a word because nobody wanted to draw his attention. A psychic from the Velith Collective who made the air hum just by thinking. A Krethval assassin whose scales shifted color like oil on water. A Morvi battle priest who carried a staff that bent gravity around it. Each one was the best their species had to offer. Each one was terrifying in their own way. And then Earth's shuttle docked. It was a small ship, old, functional, but not impressive. The kind of ship that got the job done, and nothing more. The docking clamps hissed, the ramp lowered, and out walked a single human. His name was Corporal Idris Mwangi. He was 5 feet and 10 inches tall. He had dark brown skin, short hair, and a calm face that showed nothing. He wore a plain gray military jumpsuit with no decoration, no rank insignia beyond a simple patch on his shoulder. He carried no weapon. He walked down the ramp, with his hands at his sides and his eyes forward, moving with the easy, unhurried pace of a man who had nowhere special to be. The only unusual thing about him was the metal. Strange bands of interlocking silver wrapped around his wrists, his ankles, his neck, his chest, and his temples. They were tight against his skin, and glowed faintly with a dim blue light, like something electronic was alive inside them. The hall was silent for 2 full seconds. Then Vera Kolshet laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh that filled the entire space, and within moments, half the hall joined in. The Gorath delegate made a sound like rocks grinding together, which was his species' version of amusement. A Krethval diplomat hissed something to his neighbor, and flicked his tongue in the gesture that meant pathetic. "This is Earth's champion," Vera said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This little soft creature. Does it even have claws?" She turned to her second-in-command and shook her massive head. "The larval species sends a larva." Idris said nothing. He walked to the registration platform, placed his hand on the scanner, and waited. In the upper gallery, a thin insectoid being named Ambassador Thesic watched with all 6 of his eyes. He was Morvi, small, fragile, old. He had spent 14 years fighting to get humanity accepted into the concordance of aligned worlds. He believed in them. He had read their history, studied their wars, their art, their stubborn refusal to die, even when everything said they should. He believed there was something special in them. But watching Idris stand there, small and quiet and alone, while the galaxy's greatest warriors laughed at him, Thesic felt his confidence shake. He made his way down to the registration area and found Idris collecting his quarters assignment. "Corporal Mwangi," Thesic said softly, his mandibles clicking with worry. "I must ask, forgive me, but does Earth truly have no one bigger, stronger, more visually convincing?" Idris looked down at the small insectoid ambassador. His face showed no anger, no embarrassment, just the steady patience of a man who had heard this question before. "They sent me," Idris said, "because I'm the only one rated to wear the harness." Thesic looked at the metal bands. "And what does the harness do?" Idris paused. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite sadness, not quite fear, but something heavy. "It keeps things manageable," he said, and then he walked away. That evening, the Grand Arbiter Yun Talik performed the formal scan of each champion. It was tradition. The Arbiter was ancient. No one knew exactly what species he had originally been, because centuries of biomechanical upgrades had turned him into something else entirely. He existed partly as flesh and partly as data, and his senses could read things that no scanner could match. He scanned Veira and recorded her impressive physical output. He scanned the Gorath champion and noted the density of his bone armor. He scanned the Vytherin and mapped its crystal resonance frequencies. When he scanned Idris Mwangi, he stopped. His readouts made no sense. Beneath the metal bands, something was being held down. Compressed, contained. The readings were like looking at a lake that appeared calm on the surface, but had a hurricane spinning underneath. Every biological metric was suppressed. Heart rate, neural activity, adrenal output, muscular potential, all of it pushed down to a fraction of what the baseline readings suggested was possible. The harness was not making the human stronger. The harness was holding him back. Yun Talik stared at the data for a long time. Then he quietly changed Idris Mwangi's threat classification from negligible to unknown, and said nothing to anyone. Late that night, alone in his small quarters, Idris sat on the edge of his bed and ran a systems check on the harness. Each band lit up green, one by one. Wrists, ankles, chest, neck, temples, all holding, all functioning within safe parameters. He flexed his hand, and for just a moment, the band on his left wrist flickered yellow. A warning. He relaxed, and it went back to green. Humanity had learned something terrible about itself when it first met the galaxy. They had learned that they were not like the others. Every other species had evolved with natural limits, biological safety systems that kept their bodies from destroying themselves. Humans had no such limits. Their capacity for strength, speed, endurance, and raw willpower was unregulated, uncapped. Under the right conditions, a single human could produce physical and psychic output that matched military-grade weapon systems. The cost was simple. It would kill them. The harness was humanity's answer. A cage built from the inside. A promise to the galaxy that humans could be trusted because they had chosen to chain themselves. Idris looked at the metal bands on his wrists and whispered to the empty room. "Let's hope they never ask me to take it off." Outside his window, the stars burned cold and distant, and the galaxy continued to laugh at the small, quiet creature that Earth had sent to save it. The Proving Grounds were not a place built for mercy. The Concordance had manufactured an entire moon for the Crucible, a continent-sized battlefield filled with every kind of danger the galaxy's best military engineers could design. Poisonous forests, volcanic fields, rivers of liquid metal, automated war drones that hunted anything that moved, and scattered across the landscape, creatures that had been bred for one purpose: to kill whatever the drones missed. The first trial was simple in concept and brutal in practice. Every champion was dropped at a different point along the edge of the continent. A beacon pulsed at the center, 2,000 kilometers away. They had 48 hours to reach it. Anything that stopped them was their problem. The Dryathi champion, Vera Kolshet, hit the ground running. She tore through the poisonous forest like a storm, her forearms ripping trees out of the earth when they blocked her path. When a pack of engineered predators, six-legged things with jaws like industrial shears, tried to surround her, she killed 3 of them before the others decided she was not worth the effort. She reached the beacon in 19 hours and stood there with her arms crossed, waiting for the rest to catch up. The Gorath champion simply walked forward. Nothing in the proving grounds could hurt him. Predators bit his bone armor and broke their teeth. War drones fired at him, and the shots bounced off like rain on stone. He moved slowly, but he never stopped, and he reached the beacon in 26 hours without a scratch. The Vitharan champion was faster and smarter. It moved through the landscape like a dancer, using its crystal body to refract sensor beams and become nearly invisible. It avoided every fight, outran every threat, and arrived at the beacon in 22 hours, with an elegance that made the other champions look clumsy. Idris Mwangi reached the beacon in 31 hours, middle of the pack. He had not charged through obstacles. He had not demonstrated incredible power. He had moved quietly, carefully, like a man walking through a dark room full of broken glass. When he could avoid a fight, he did. When he could not, he fought with a strange, precise efficiency, striking at joints, at nerve clusters, at weak points that should not have been obvious. He set traps with materials he found on the ground. He used the terrain against his enemies. He did what he needed to do, and nothing more. The viewing galleries, where thousands of alien spectators watched on massive screens, were not impressed. The humans survived by hiding, Vera said, to a group of champions who had gathered near the beacon. The Krethval champion flicked his tongue in agreement. Even the ones who did not laugh said nothing in Idris's defense. Idris heard them. He did not respond. He sat on a rock near the beacon, drank water from his canteen, and waited for the next trial. The second trial was one-on-one combat. The brackets were assigned randomly by the Arbiter system. Each champion would face another in direct combat inside a shielded arena. The fights continued until one champion surrendered, was knocked unconscious, or was unable to continue. Idris drew the Krethval champion, a reptilian warrior named Scythek. Scythek was 7 feet tall, covered in scales that could harden into natural armor, and had venom glands in his forearms that could inject a neurotoxin strong enough to paralyze a Gorath in seconds. He was fast. He was experienced. And when he saw that his opponent was the human, he smiled with a mouth full of curved teeth. "I will try to make this quick," Scythek said as they entered the arena. "For your sake." The fight began. Scythek was fast. He closed the distance in a blur of scales and muscle, striking with his clawed hands and whipping his tail at Idris's legs. His first hit connected, a hard slash across Idris's left arm that cut through the jumpsuit and drew blood. The crowd expected Idris to fall. Humans were soft, fragile. Everyone knew this. Idris did not fall. He stepped back, adjusted his stance, and something changed. It was small, almost invisible, but the people who were paying close attention, and there were very few of them, noticed it. Idris moved faster. Not dramatically, not impossibly, but faster than a creature of his size and build should have been able to move. He ducked under Scythek's next strike, by a margin so thin that the scales on the reptile's arm brushed against Idris's hair. Scythek struck again and again. Idris took hits. He bled. A tail strike caught him in the ribs, and everyone heard the crack. But he did not go down. He absorbed each blow with a grunt, and kept moving, kept adjusting, kept closing the distance. Then Sci-Fi used his venom. He caught Idris's shoulder with his forearm and drove the hollow spine into the muscle. The neurotoxin pumped in, enough to drop a creature 3 times Idris's size. Idris staggered. His left side went numb. His hands stopped working. The crowd leaned forward, expecting the end. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds. Idris shook his head, like a man clearing water from his eyes. The numbness receded. His hand clenched into a fist again. He looked at Sci-Fi, and for the first time in the fight, there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. It was not anger. It was focus. The kind of focus that comes from something deep and primal. Something that had nothing to do with training or discipline, and everything to do with what lived in the blood and bone of a species that had spent 200,000 years fighting to survive on a world that had never once been kind to them. Idris hit Sci-Fi 3 times. The first strike was to the throat, a precise, short punch that collapsed the reptile's windpipe for half a second. The second was to the nerve cluster beneath the left arm, which caused Sci-Fi's entire left side to seize. The third was an open palm strike to the center of the chest that sent the 7-foot reptilian champion stumbling backward, gasping, his armored scales cracked at the point of impact. Sci-Fi tried to recover. Idris did not let him. He moved in with a grinding, relentless pressure that was not beautiful or elegant, but was absolutely, terrifyingly effective. Every time Sci-Fi tried to create distance, Idris was there. Every time Sci-Fi tried to strike, Idris was already inside his guard. The human took punishment that should have broken him and did not stop. Sci-Fi surrendered. Not because he was beaten, but because he was afraid. Something in the way the human kept coming, kept absorbing damage, kept refusing to stay down. It was wrong. It did not match what a creature that small and that soft should be able to do. After the fight, the medical drones swarmed Idris. Their scans lit up with anomalies. His bone density was 3 times the galactic average. His pain receptors were being actively suppressed, not by drugs, but by the harness, which was damping his nervous system to keep him within safe limits. His adrenal output was so far above normal that the drones flagged it as a sensor error, recalibrated, scanned again, and got the same result. Idris had cracked ribs, a torn muscle in his left shoulder, and enough venom in his bloodstream to kill most species. He sat on the medical table and waited patiently while the drones worked. In the viewing gallery, Vera Kolshet watched the replay of the fight for the 3rd time. She had stopped laughing somewhere around the 2nd viewing. Her second-in-command stood beside her, shifting uncomfortably. He was not fighting at full capacity, Vera said. It was not a question. She could see it, the way the harness bands flickered when Idris moved, the way his muscles tensed against the metal like a river pushing against a dam. But the bands were making him weaker. What happens, Vera said slowly, if you take the restraints off a creature that fights like that while wearing them? Her second-in-command had no answer. In his private chamber, the Grand Arbiter Yun Talik reviewed the combat data one more time. He pulled up the readout from the harness, the data it was transmitting to his systems as part of the Crucible's monitoring protocol. The numbers beneath the restraints were staggering. If the harness were removed, the projected output was beyond anything in the current champion roster, beyond anything in the Concordance military database. The projections carried a red warning tag that Yun Talik had only seen once before in his very long life, attached to a planetary-scale weapon system. The tag read, "Uncontainable." Yun Talik sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what humanity had sent them, and wondering if the galaxy was ready to see it. Between the trials, the Pinnacle Spire became a strange kind of village. The champions lived on the same floor, ate in the same hall, and had nowhere to go but into each other's company. Alliances formed quickly. The Gorath and Dryathi champions trained together, shaking the walls of the combat gymnasium with the force of their sparring. The Vytheran champion meditated alone, filling its quarters with patterns of refracted light. The remaining champions formed small groups based on old treaties, species alliances, or simple convenience. Nobody invited Idris. He did not seem to mind. He kept to himself, ate alone, and spent his free time in a small observation room with a wide window that looked out at the stars. He sat there for hours, doing nothing but watching the dark, and sometimes writing in a small notebook he kept in his breast pocket. It was Ambassador Thesic who came to find him on the third evening. The old Morvi diplomat moved slowly through the corridor on his thin legs, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence as they adjusted to the dim light. He found Idris in his usual spot, sitting on the floor with his back against the window, the notebook closed on his knee, his eyes distant. "May I sit?" Thesic asked. Idris nodded. The insectoid lowered himself carefully to the floor, his joints clicking softly. For a while, neither of them spoke. Thesic was not a creature who rushed conversations. He had learned over decades of diplomacy that silence was a language of its own, and humans seemed to understand it better than most. "The other champions talk about you," Thesic said finally. "I know. They do not understand you. They see a small, soft creature that survives by cleverness and stubbornness, and they think that is all there is." Thesic turned 2 of his eyes toward the metal bands on Idris's wrists. "I do not think that is all there is." Idris looked at the ambassador for a long moment. Then he held up his left arm. The band around his wrist glowed with its steady blue light, and beneath it, the veins in his forearm stood out faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that was just slightly too fast to be resting. "Do you know why the Concordance almost rejected Earth's application?" Idris asked. "Politics," Thesic said. "Larger species did not want to share resources with a young world. That was the public reason. The real reason was the Kalen incident." Thesic's mandibles went still. He had heard the name, but did not know the details. Very few people did. Idris looked back out at the stars and spoke quietly, as though he were telling a story he had told before, but never enjoyed telling. "When humanity made first contact, it was with a Kalen trading vessel that entered our solar system. The meeting was supposed to be peaceful. Diplomats, translators, scientists. Everything was going well. Our ambassador was a woman named Dr. Lena Okafor. Calm, brilliant, exactly the kind of person you would want representing your species." He paused. Then, things went wrong. There was a misunderstanding. The Kalen security chief thought one of our team was reaching for a weapon. He wasn't. He was reaching for a translation device. But the Kalen reacted. They activated their ship's internal defense system, which locked down the meeting room. The walls started closing in. The air pressure changed. It was a containment protocol, but to a group of humans who had never seen alien technology, it felt like they were about to be crushed to death. Thesic listened. His eyes never blinked. Dr. Okafor panicked. Not in the way you might think. She didn't scream or run. Her body just reacted. The stress hit a level that triggered something in her biology, something no one on Earth fully understood at the time. Idris flexed his hand slowly. She grabbed the meeting room's blast door, a reinforced alloy door designed to withstand ship-to-ship weapons fire, and she tore it off its frame with her bare hands. The door weighed 3 tons. The silence that followed was heavy. She broke every bone in both her arms doing it, Idris continued. Tore most of the muscles in her shoulders and back. Ruptured blood vessels in her brain. She was in a coma for 2 months, but she got her team out. And the Kalen? They were terrified. They filed a report with the Concordance that said humanity was a Class 7 biological hazard. The Concordance sent a research team to Earth. They studied us for 3 years. They tested our soldiers, our athletes, our ordinary civilians, and they found something that made them very, very uncomfortable. Idris turned to look at the ambassador directly. Every species in the galaxy evolved with biological limiters, safety systems. Your body reaches a certain level of output, and something in your biology says, stop, this will damage you. Your muscles lock, your adrenaline caps, your nervous system shuts down the override before you can hurt yourself. He tapped the band on his wrist. Humans don't have that. We have no cap, no ceiling. Under enough stress, enough fear, enough anger, enough despair, our bodies will push past every safe limit and keep going until something breaks. Our muscles will tear themselves off the bone. Our hearts will beat until they burst. Our nervous systems will burn out like overloaded circuits. And the entire time, we will keep fighting, keep moving, keep refusing to stop. Not because we are brave, because our biology does not give us a choice. Thesic understood now. He looked at the harness with new eyes. The bands, he whispered. The harness is a limiter, Idris confirmed. Humanity built it after the Kalen incident. It monitors every system in my body and actively suppresses anything that goes above safe parameters. It keeps my adrenaline in check. It regulates my neural output. It prevents my muscles from generating force beyond what my bones can handle. Without it, I could do what Dr. Okafor did, or worse. Much worse. He paused. But it would kill me. Maybe not immediately, but soon. And the Concordance required this, for you to compete? No, we required it. Earth made it a condition of our own participation. We told the galaxy we would send a champion, but we would send one in chains, because we understood what would happen if we didn't. Idris's voice was steady, but Thesic could hear something underneath it. Not shame exactly, but a kind of sorrow. The sorrow of a species that had looked at its own potential and decided it needed a cage. The Concordance was relieved, Idris said. They accepted us because we volunteered to restrain ourselves, because we proved that we could be trusted. And can you, Thesic asked gently, be trusted? Idris smiled, and it was a sad smile. I hope so. The conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Not the kind that signaled a drill or a schedule change, but the kind that made the walls vibrate and the lights turn red. Idris was already standing, his hand instinctively going to the band on his wrist. A voice filled the station. The Grand Arbiter's voice, flat and ancient, and heavy with something that sounded like dread. All champions and delegates report to the central chamber. The timeline has changed. The hollowing has breached the outer defense line. 2 border worlds are gone. The entity is moving faster than our projections. The final trial of the Crucible will begin in 12 hours. The corridor outside erupted into noise, footsteps, shouting, the sound of species who had been confident an hour ago, suddenly realizing that the war they had been preparing for was already at their door. Idris stood still in the middle of it all, his eyes closed, his breathing steady. The bands on his body glowed their calm blue, and beneath them something stirred, something vast and restless that pushed against the metal like a heartbeat made of thunder. 2 hours later, in the training hall, Vera Kolshet found him. The Drayathi champion was shaken. Idris could see it in the way she held her forearms tight against her body, the way her golden eyes moved too quickly. Human, she said. There was no mockery in her voice now. You fight like you are holding something back. All of you humans do. I have watched the recordings. I have read the reports. Every human I have ever seen moves like there is something inside them pulling at a leash. She stepped closer. What are you afraid of? Idris looked up at the towering warrior. He did not flinch. He did not look away. Ourselves, he said. Vera stared at him. For the first time since the Crucible began, she did not have a response. She turned and walked away, and Idris watched her go. And then he looked down at his hands, at the metal bands that kept him human, and he wondered if 12 hours from now he would still be wearing them. The arena had been rebuilt overnight. What had once been a combat ring for one-on-one duels was now a massive open space, 3 kilometers across, reinforced with energy shields and surrounded by observation platforms that floated at a safe distance. The Concordance's best engineers had worked through the night to prepare it, and the fear in their movements said more than any briefing could. The hollowing vanguard was coming, not the full entity. That was still consuming its way through the outer systems, a tide of impossible darkness eating stars and worlds alike. What was coming was a fragment, a piece of the whole, sent ahead like a finger reaching into a room before the body follows. The Concordance's scientists said it was small. They said this the way a person might say a hurricane is small compared to the planet it sits on. Every surviving champion stood on the arena floor, waiting. 12 of the original 23 remained. Vera Kolshet stood at the front, her 4 arms already holding energy blades that hummed with a sound like angry wasps. The Gorath champion stood beside her, immovable as a mountain. The Vytherin champion floated nearby, its crystal body catching the arena lights and throwing rainbows across the ground. The others spread out in a loose formation, each one prepared in their own way. Idris Mwangi stood at the back, quiet, steady. The bands of his harness glowed blue. Then the sky above the arena tore open. There was no other word for it. Reality itself split apart like wet paper, and through the gap came something that the mind was not designed to look at. The hollowing vanguard was not a creature in the way that the champions understood creatures. It was a wound in the shape of a living thing, a mass of shifting darkness and angles that did not belong in 3-dimensional space. Where it moved, the air screamed. Where its shadow fell, the ground turned gray and dead. It had no face, but it had a presence, and that presence was the worst part. Because the hollowing did not just kill, it despaired. The psychic wave hit the arena like an invisible wall. Every champion felt it at the same moment. A crushing, suffocating pressure that pushed into their minds and filled them with the absolute certainty that nothing they did would matter. That the galaxy was already lost. That resistance was not just pointless, but foolish. The last pathetic gesture of species that were too stupid to accept that they were already dead. The Gorath champion, a being who had never shown fear in his life, dropped to his knees and began to weep. Thick tears ran down his bone armor, and his massive hands pressed against the sides of his head as if trying to hold his skull together. The Velith psychic collapsed completely, its mind overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the entity's broadcast. 2 other champions simply stopped moving. They stood where they were, weapons hanging at their sides, their eyes empty. They had been broken in seconds. Vera fought it. Of course she did. She screamed, a Dryathi war cry that shook the air, and charged the entity with all 4 blades swinging. She was magnificent. Her strikes carved into the vanguard's physical shell, sending pieces of dark matter spinning away into nothing. She moved with a fury and a skill that would have destroyed any normal enemy. But the entity was not normal. It reformed as fast as she could cut, and all the while, the despair wave hammered at her mind, showing her things, her homeworld in flames, her family dead, the Dryathi species reduced to nothing. She landed a dozen perfect strikes, then her arms began to slow, her war cry faded into ragged breathing. She fell to one knee, and one of her blades clattered to the ground. The Vytherin champion tried next. It focused its crystal body into a single beam of concentrated energy, and fired directly into the entity's core. The beam hit, and for a moment, the entity shuddered. Then it adapted. It absorbed the light, turned it dark, and sent it back. The Vytherin's crystal structure cracked down the center with a sound like breaking glass, and the champion collapsed into a pile of fractured shards. One by one, the greatest warriors in the galaxy fell. Not to physical force, to despair. The hollowing had evolved to break willpower first, because a species that has given up does not fight back when the main body arrives to feed. In the observation platform, Grand Arbiter Yun Tolik watched his screens with growing horror. Every champion's readouts were in decline, heart rates dropping, neural activity fading, the will to fight draining away like water from a cracked glass. Every readout except one. Idris Mwangi's readings were going in the opposite direction. His heart rate was climbing. His adrenal output was spiking. His neural activity was not declining. It was exploding, lighting up regions of the brain that the Concordance's medical science did not even have names for. And the harness was screaming. Every band was flashing yellow, then orange, then red, cycling through warning states faster than the monitoring system could display them. The despair wave was hitting Idris just as hard as everyone else, but it was not breaking him. It was doing something that the hollowing had never encountered before. It was making him angry. Not the anger of frustration or offended pride. Something deeper. The human body was interpreting the psychic assault as a threat. The deepest kind of threat. The kind that triggers the oldest survival responses. The ones written not in the brain, but in the blood and the bone. And because human biology had no limits, no cap, no safety system to say, this is enough, the response kept building and building, a feedback loop of fury that the harness was barely containing. Yun Tolik opened a comm channel. His ancient voice was tight. Corporal Mwangi, your harness is failing. Idris stood in the center of the arena, blood running from his nose, his teeth clenched so hard that hairline fractures were forming in his jaw. His whole body trembled, not with weakness, but with the effort of holding something back. Around him, the ground cracked in small spiderweb patterns as micro-shock waves leaked from his body, where the harness was losing containment. It's not failing, Arbiter, Idris said. His voice was steady and strange. I'm deciding. The entity turned its attention to him. It could sense the anomaly, this small creature that was not breaking, that was somehow converting its weapon into fuel. It focused the full force of its psychic assault on Idris alone. It showed him everything. Earth burning, his mother dying, his friends screaming, the pointlessness of his entire species. It poured centuries of accumulated despair into one fragile human mind and waited for the crack. Something in Idris snapped, but it was not his will. It was his patience. He reached up to his left wrist and unclipped the first band. The effect was immediate. A pulse of force exploded outward from his arm, cracking the arena floor in a circle around him. His left hand blurred with speed, clenching and unclenching as muscles that had been restrained for months suddenly operated without limits. He reached for the next band. It came free, and another shockwave rippled through the ground. His arms swelled, not grotesquely, but visibly, the muscles expanding to their true capacity, veins rising to the surface like cables beneath the skin. The ankle bands came off next, then the chest plate. Each release sent another pulse through the arena, and each pulse was stronger than the last. The champions who were still conscious, Vera, the Gorath, a handful of others, stared at the human with expressions that ranged from confusion to terror. The last band was the one on his temples, the neural limiter, the one that kept his brain from overclocking itself into a seizure. Idris paused. His body was already changing, faster, denser, more alive than anything in the arena had ever seen. His eyes were fully dilated, black from edge to edge. Blood seeped from his ears and his fingernails. He was already hurting. Already burning. He pulled the last band free. The sound that came from him was not a war cry. It was not a scream. It was a low, shuddering exhale. like a man putting down a weight he had been carrying for his entire life. And then he moved. He crossed the distance to the hollowing vanguard in less than a second. The air cracked behind him, a sonic boom inside a closed arena. His first punch hit the entity's shell with the force of a concussion bomb, and the creature recoiled. It had never been hit like that. Nothing had ever hit it like that. Idris did not stop. He could not stop. His body was an engine running without a governor, and every ounce of despair the entity had poured into him was now being converted into raw, physical destruction. He punched. He tore. He grabbed pieces of the entity's form and ripped them away with hands that were breaking and re-healing in the same motion, bones fracturing under the force of his own muscles and fusing back together through sheer biological stubbornness. The entity fought back. It lashed at him with tendrils of dark matter that burned through reality itself. They hit Idris, and he bled. They tore his skin, and he kept going. They broke his ribs, and he screamed and swung harder. He was not winning gracefully. He was winning the way humans had always won, by refusing to die faster than they could fight. Vera Kalshet, still on one knee, watched with her golden eyes wide. "What is he?" she whispered. Ambassador Thesic, watching from the observation platform, with tears running from all 6 of his eyes, answered her through the open comm channel. That is what a human looks like when they stop being afraid of themselves. The fight lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. By the end, Idris had torn the hollowing vanguard apart with his bare hands. The entity died screaming, a psychic shriek that every sensitive species in the pinnacle spire felt like a knife behind the eyes. It thrashed and writhed and tried to retreat back through the tear in reality it had come from, but Idris followed it. He grabbed the edges of its form and pulled in opposite directions, and the thing that had consumed entire star systems came apart like wet cloth in the hands of a creature that should not have been able to touch it. Then, silence. Idris stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by the dissolving remains of the vanguard. He was a ruin. Both arms were shattered below the elbow. His left knee was dislocated. Blood poured from his eyes, his ears, his nose, his mouth. His skin was cracked in places, where his muscles had literally torn through from beneath. His heart was beating at a rate that no medical drone had ever recorded in a living being. He turned to look at the surviving champions. His black, dilated eyes swept across them. Across Vera, across the Gorath, across every being that had laughed at him, dismissed him, pitied him. Then his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. The medical drones swarmed him before he hit the ground. His heart stopped twice on the way to the medical wing. They brought him back both times, because human hearts, it turned out, were just as stubborn as the rest of them. In the arena, nobody moved for a very long time, and nobody laughed at Earth ever again. Idris Mwangi died 3 times on the medical table. The first time, his heart simply stopped. The damage was too severe. Ruptured blood vessels, shattered bones, muscles torn from their anchors, and a brain that had been running so far beyond safe limits that the neural pathways had literally burned. The Concordance medical drones pumped stimulants and regenerative compounds into him, and his heart started again. Not because the medicine was that good, but because something in his body refused to accept that it was finished. The second time, 16 hours later, a clot broke loose from his left lung and stopped his heart mid-beat. The drones caught it in 4 seconds. They cleared the clot and restarted the rhythm, and the human body, battered and broken and held together with alien technology and its own impossible stubbornness, kept going. 2 days after the battle, Idris's immune system, overwhelmed by the cascade of injuries, turned on itself. His temperature spiked to a level that should have cooked his brain. His organs began to shut down one by one, like lights going out in a building. The Concordance doctors had never seen a body fight so hard to destroy itself, and they had also never seen a body fight so hard to survive at the same time. It was as if two forces were at war inside him, one that wanted to collapse and one that simply would not allow it. Ambassador Fesick stayed by his bed the entire time. The old Morvi diplomat did not sleep. He sat in a chair that was too big for his small frame, his 6 eyes watching the monitors, his mandibles clicking softly in what passed for prayer among his people. When the doctors told him that the human might not wake up, Fesick nodded and said, "You do not know humans very well." On the 9th day, Idris opened his eyes. His arms were wrapped in regenerative casts that glowed with a soft green light. His chest was bound with a web of biosynthetic fibers that were slowly rebuilding the muscle tissue he had destroyed. A neural stabilizer sat on his temples, where the harness band had once been, monitoring his brain activity for signs of permanent damage. "Ambassador," he said. His voice was a dry whisper. Fesick leaned forward. "Welcome back, Corporal." "Did it work?" "The Vanguard is destroyed. Completely. There is nothing left of it." Idris closed his eyes. Good. And then he went back to sleep. And Fesick watched the monitors and saw that for the first time in 9 days, the human's heart rate was calm. The galaxy, however, was anything but calm. The footage of the battle had spread across every network in the Concordance within hours. Every species with access to a screen had watched it. The small, unremarkable human standing alone in an arena full of fallen champions, pulling the metal bands from his body one by one, and then doing something that no living being in recorded galactic history had ever done. He had killed a hollowing vanguard with his bare hands. The reactions were complicated. On Dreath, the warrior homeworld, the footage was played in every training hall. The Dreathi did not know what to feel. They had spent 10,000 years believing that physical dominance was their birthright, that no species in the galaxy could match them in combat. They had been wrong. The debates in their war councils lasted for days, and no consensus was reached, except one. The human had earned something that could not be taken back. On Gorathis, the reaction was quieter. The Gorath champion, the 12-foot titan who had wept on the arena floor, requested a private meeting with the Concordance Council and formally apologized for underestimating Earth's contribution. For a species that valued strength above all else, this was not a small thing. Among the Vitharin, the crystalline species, the footage was analyzed from a scientific perspective. They were fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. A species with no biological limiters was, in their assessment, an evolutionary impossibility. A design flaw that should have killed the species long before it reached spaceflight. The fact that humans had not only survived, but had learned to build their own limiters and wear them voluntarily, was, in the words of their chief scientist, the most terrifying act of self-awareness in the biological record. And in the halls of the Pinnacle Spire, Vera Kolshet walked to the medical wing. She did not ask permission. She walked through the doors, past the medical drones, and stopped at the foot of Idris's bed. He was awake, propped up slightly, looking out the window at the stars. He turned his head when he heard her footsteps. Vera did not say anything for a long time. She looked at the human, at the bandages, the casts, the monitors, the broken body that was slowly, stubbornly putting itself back together. She looked at the space on his wrists, where the harness bands had been. Then she did something that no Dreathi had done in the presence of another species in over 1,000 years. She knelt, all the way down, her massive frame folding until her knees touched the floor, and her 4 fists pressed against the ground in front of her. Her head bowed. It was the deepest gesture of acknowledgement in Dryati culture, reserved only for warriors who had proven something that could not be argued with, could not be debated, could only be witnessed and accepted. Kol Vrethis, she said. The word was old. It meant roughly, the one I was wrong about. But the full meaning carried more weight than the translation. It meant that the speaker had been fundamentally changed by being wrong, and was grateful for it. Idris looked at her. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply nodded and said, "Get up, Vera. We have a war to fight." She rose, and something in the way she stood, taller, steadier, with a new fire in her golden eyes, said that the war had already changed. 3 days later, the Concordance War Council convened. The chamber was full. Every species was represented, and for the first time in the Concordance's history, the seat reserved for Earth's representative was not at the back of the room. It had been moved to the front row. The discussion was direct. The hollowing was still coming. The vanguard had been a test, a scout, a single finger of a hand that spanned light years. The real threat was still months away, but it was coming and it would not stop. But Idris had proven something that changed the equation. The hollowing could be hurt. Its greatest weapon, the psychic despair wave that had broken every species it had ever encountered, had a blind spot. It assumed that despair weakened its targets. For humans, despair could become fuel. Earth was asked to send more soldiers. The response from Earth was honest. It came through Ambassador Fesick, who read it to the Council with his thin voice steady and his eyes clear. Humanity is honored by the Concordance's request, but we must be transparent. What Corporal Mwangi did was not a tactic. It was a sacrifice. He removed his harness, knowing that it would destroy his body. Very few humans are psychologically stable enough to wear a harness under combat stress, and none can sustain unrestrained output for more than a few minutes without fatal consequences. We cannot mass-produce what he did. We will not pretend otherwise. The Council was silent. The hope that had built around the footage of the battle wavered. Then Fesick continued. However, Earth has been working on something since the Crucible began. A new generation of harness, a partial release system. It does not remove all restraints. It allows controlled bursts of elevated output for short periods, with automatic re-engagement to prevent lethal damage. It is dangerous. It is imperfect, but it is survivable. And Earth is prepared to deploy 500 soldiers, equipped with the new system. The Council erupted. 500 humans. 500 beings who carried inside them the capacity to fight a god, and had chosen to chain that capacity until the moment it was needed. It was not an army by Concordance standards. It was something else. Something that did not have a name yet. 3 weeks later, Idris stood at the observation window for the last time. His arms were out of the casts. His chest had healed. A new harness, lighter, sleeker, with the partial release modifications built in, sat on the table beside him. He had not put it on yet. Vera stood next to him. Their reflections overlapped in the glass, the towering red warrior and the small, scarred human standing side by side, as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. "Are you afraid?" Vera asked. It was the same question she had asked before the final trial. But her voice was different now. There was no challenge in it. Only the honest curiosity of someone who wanted to understand. Idris picked up the new harness and began fitting the bands to his wrists, one by one. "I've always been afraid," he said. "That's the secret, Vera. We're always afraid. We just learned a long time ago that fear doesn't get to make our choices for us." Vera nodded slowly. She did not fully understand, but she was beginning to. Outside the window, the stars shifted as a new fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Human transports, hundreds of them, plain and functional and unremarkable, just like the man who had come before them. They formed up alongside the Concordance fleet, in clean, quiet rows, and from each ship came a signal. Online, ready, standing by, 500 soldiers, 500 harnesses, 500 cages that would open when the time came. The Concordance fleet hailed the human transports, and the greeting that came back was not a boast or a war cry. It was a simple acknowledgement, calm and professional, the voice of a species that understood the weight of what it carried, and had chosen to carry it anyway. In the communication center of the Pinnacle Spire, a young alien comm officer, a Morvi barely out of training, with wide eyes and trembling mandibles, watched the human fleet settle into formation. She had seen the footage. She had watched Idris Mwangi tear a god apart with his bare hands and nearly die for it. She had watched the recordings of Dr. Okafor ripping a blast door off its hinges. She had read the reports. She knew what was inside those ships. She opened a personal log entry because she needed to say it to someone, even if that someone was only her future self. "Gods help whatever tries to break them," she whispered. Then she paused, looked at the fleet of quiet, unassuming ships, and added with a shiver that ran through all 6 of her legs, "And gods help us all if they ever break themselves." The log entry closed. The fleet moved forward, and the galaxy, for the first time in a long time, believed it might survive. Not because of the strongest species, or the smartest, or the oldest, but because of the one that had looked at its own terrifying, limitless nature and had chosen, every single day, to put the chains back on.